Hello and welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide. Just click on www.performanceinsights.co.uk and send us your requirements.
Hello, and you're very welcome to the latest episode of the Business of Winning podcast with me, Mark Gallagher. I hope you've caught your breath after a busy and hectic and very thrilling Qatar Grand Prix, won, of course, by Max Verstappen and supported brilliantly by the strategy team at Red Bull Racing, headed, of course, by principal strategist Hannah Schmitz, who joined Max on the podium to receive the trophy on behalf of the team. And Hannah and her team of strategists and engineers, trackside and back in Milton Keynes, made absolutely the right call, the instantaneous split-second call to make the most of that early safety car rather, to call a pit stop for Max and give him an advantage over McLaren, who failed to stop and, quite frankly, handed the race on a platter to Red Bull Racing and to Max. And of course you can't afford to give Max Verstappen an opportunity like that. He's well and truly going to grab it with both hands. So we're set up for an amazing three-way battle for the World Drivers' Championship in Abu Dhabi this coming weekend. Who knows what's going to happen? Max will be going for the win, so too will be Oscar and Lando. The question is, will the two McLaren drivers trip each other up? Will McLaren ask Mercedes-Benz to step in and help them with some of the strategies? You know, for example, if a Mercedes-Benz driver was heading for a podium finish, but they had to give way to Lando Norris, could you imagine Zak Brown putting in a call to Toto Wolff to ask him for a little bit of help maybe in the closing laps? Who knows what's going to unfold? It's going to be fascinating, and how brilliant it is for Formula One to have this three-way battle. First time in 15 years we've had three drivers going for the World Championship at the final round of what has been, of course, an extraordinarily long season, 24 races. This week's episode, I'm in conversation with not one, but two people. I've got Xevi Pujolar and Nash Mayuela. And Xevi is known, of course, to many Formula One fans. He's been involved in the sport for 25 years. He is a graduate from the University of Girona, Spanish engineer, who came into Formula One via karting and junior formula. First of all, worked with Niki Lauda's team, which at the time was Jaguar Racing. In fact, he was a performance engineer with a former lodger of mine, Eddie Irvine, and then joined the Williams team and worked his way through, of course, not just Williams, but and we'll talk to him in the interview about a rather famous victory with Pastor Maldonado, which some of you will remember back in the 2012 Spanish Grand Prix. He then went on to Toro Rosso, and then really for the last decade has been at the Sauber team, where he was promoted to racing director and has remained with the team right up until this year, when of course it's now transitioning across to being Audi. So Xevi, really one of Formula One's most experienced and highly successful engineers. And he's going to be joined by Nash Mayuela. Now, Nash, not known to Formula One fans, but Nash is passionate about peak performance. She coaches something called Flow, which we're going to discuss during the podcast. And essentially, Nash has realized that there's so much to be learned from Formula One, and it's kind of a perfect, if you like, case study on what it is that she is so passionate about in terms of people and organizations achieving peak performance. So Nash and Xevi have come together to create a program which they're offering to businesses, and we thought we'd have them on the podcast to just talk to us about their insights and what they feel from the world of Formula One can really be learned by businesses and by individuals. And so I hope you enjoy this conversation with them. Sit back and listen to Xevi and Nash, and thanks again for joining the Business of Winning podcast. Xevi Pujolar needs relatively little introduction to Formula One fans. Very well known for his role, particularly at Sauber, and very much leading the team in terms of track operations, race director. We'll talk to Xevi about that. And then Nash, who is partnering with Xevi, and they'll tell you a little bit about the program that they're offering and that they're working on together, because it's right up my street in terms of taking business insights and lessons from Formula One and applying it to people and organizations beyond that. So I'm gonna jump in, Nash, with a question to you first of all, since we'll put you in the hot seat, and it's great to have you join us. Can you just tell listeners a little bit about your own background and experiences and how you came up to meet Xevi and launch this fascinating program that you have?
So my path towards peak performance wasn't very linear. I've been in different industries, outdoor industry, publishing, and tech startups. Eventually, my background is psychology, so my bachelor's in psychology. But as a rock climber, a lot of the things we do, not so much just on the physical side, but very much so on the mental side, because it's like a high risk sport. So that's kind of like how I really got into the world of high performance. There was a time where I was so curious about what flow is. I never really knew what that feeling was, what that state of consciousness was. So I dug deeper into that until eventually I got into that world. So I worked with Flow Center, which is one of the three companies in the world that really focuses on the research and the science, the psychology and neuroscience of flow and peak performance. So there we were able to we were able to work with world champions, elite athletes, neurosurgeons, heart surgeons, like sports that are high stakes, where the margin of error is practically zero. And I got exposed in that world, which was very useful. That my background is psychology, but then the training, the mentorship, and what we're really focusing on is how to get into flow on command when it matters most, especially when the stakes are high, because that's not very easy. Um, so that's where I am now. I have I do consulting, coaching, one-on-one private coaching, and advisory as well. That's kind of like how I got to know Chevy through LinkedIn. There was a point where I kept digging on which sports would need flow because I was really looking into high stakes sports, action adventure sports. And so I asked ChatGPT, ChatGPT, can you tell me which sports? And so I was like, there were a couple of sports, and then there was racing, Formula One. I'm like, I don't know what this world is. And so I kept researching, and then eventually, like, I looked around on LinkedIn and started connecting people on LinkedIn that are in Formula One. The purpose was I wanted to know what they have to say about the sport so that I could like see what is going on, what's the psychology, how do they approach it, not just in terms of the racing, it's the actual drivers itself, but really what is the environment, what is the culture. And that's how Chev and I got connected.
Now, for the uninitiated, Nash, can you just explain to our listeners that you and Chevy have got this operating system, pole position operating system that you've developed, and you've already talked about flow. So, simple question: what is flow? Can you just explain flow to, particularly for the uninitiated, because it's so fascinating once you get into this topic. So if you can give us that heads up, and then I'll turn to you, Chevy, and we'll talk about your involvement in this program.
Okay, the definition that I really like to use is what Stephen Kotler, he has a book called Art of the Impossible, The Rise of Superman. And I like his definition. It said somewhere along the lines of it's the optimal state of consciousness where you feel your best and you perform your best. And I'm like, bam, I love that. How can I get there on command, especially when the stakes are high, especially when you're under pressure? Like, how do I get there? It becomes automatic. So that is what flow state is. And that is what we need to train, especially if you're in high performance world.
So, Chevy, we're going to talk about flow in the moment from your perspective, but little bit of background about you, of course. you came into motorsport very much the way that a lot of drivers come into motorsport, starting in karting. I can't believe that you came across Fernando Alonso all those years ago. That's just extraordinary. And then progressed through the lower ranks into Formula One with Jaguar Racing and then Williams. As an engineer, at what point did you start to look at the human dimension, of what we're trying to achieve? Because I think so much of Formula One is, we spend so much time talking about the technology. We spend so much time talking about the regulations and the compliance and aerodynamics and vehicle dynamics and powertrain systems, and it's all that technical stuff. And yet, I'm pretty sure you and I both know that it's when you get into leadership roles that all of a sudden it's people, how they work together, all that kind of stuff. So for you as an engineer, what was your can you think back to when you started to realize actually there's a whole bunch of things on the human side that are just as important as the technical?
Yeah. So as you say, when I started in go-kart junior series, I was focusing really into on the technical side, trying to understand what's happening with the go-kart or with the car, and then with the Formula One, trying to understand with the data how I can get a translation of what's happening on track, just looking at the data. Then that was when I was in junior series go-kart and Formula One performance engineer. Then you start to work more also with the driver. You understand the driver that is not a machine, is human. Especially working and then as a race engineer, you work more on the you still have a lot on the technical side, but as a race engineer, senior race engineer, you start to understand the driver and how the driver will feel about the car and the perception of what's going on. And also you have got a small team, you have got your car crew. So there I thought already, I understood that actually there is a human factor that is quite critical. And sometimes, well, we can see now at the races, no, if the driver doesn't feel the confidence, it will never happen, no. So on that, and then from senior race engineer to head of track engineering, then I realized that actually it's not only the driver and the car. When you have got a team of engineers, and then later on you have got technicians, actually then is the entire organization that it needs to work as a high performance team. Then it's not even if you have got a quick car or a good driver or a car and a driver, if the team doesn't work together, it will never happen. So I would say in the last 15 years is where I start to put a lot of emphasis trying to understand what you say, that human factor, no? And with all the different departments, and the bigger the team is more and more complex, and when you work in a junior series, if you have got a group of 5, 10 people, it will be quite straightforward. You have got a lot of visibility of what's going on. When you have got teams of 100, 700, 1,000 people, that is where it gets complex, and is how can we engineer now, not on the technical side but also on the human side. That's how I came across of all that. And taking the opportunity, then I was going a bit sideways from Formula One this in 2025, and see if I could do something on that. Just trying to get the expertise, what I've seen in Formula One, and applying to other industries. Because talking to some friends working in other industries and looking at the limitations they face, in terms of how quickly we can develop, how can we take decisions in Formula One, when we are in a race and we can take a decision in seconds, is when we say that we are in when you feel in the zone, no. I didn't know at that time that was flow, but I was thinking, okay, how can we get all this knowledge into outside of Formula One? And I wanted to use my expertise, but I wanted to join forces with someone that had also the theoretical, the technical side on the psychological. And that's how I came across with Nash and said, okay, I think we need to merge and put all the knowledge together, and like this we can be much more powerful.
Now, Chevy, I got to tell you, a long time ago, I had a lodger living in my house called Eddie Irvine, fellow Irishman, and he lived with me for a year, and then he went off into Formula One. You ended up working with him at Jaguar Racing, and And I was looking at the other drivers you've been working with, Eddie Irvine and Juan Pablo Montoya, Mark Webber and Katsuki Nakajima-san and Pastor Maldonado, and I'm talking about guys from earlier in your career, and then more recently, obviously the driver lineups at Alfa Romeo Racing and at Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber, etc. And the one thing which I know only too well, especially when you live with a driver like Eddie, these are all very different personalities. They all may have one thing in common, that they're Formula One drivers, but the personalities are really quite different. Ralf Schumacher is another one that, I've had the experience of working with Ralph when he was at Jordan, for example. So for you as an engineer who deals in the, if you like, the certainty of mathematics and science and the laws of physics and, the dynamics of things, how frustrating is it to then have this very different side to what you have to do? You got to make the human being interact with the car in a particular way, and they are all completely different personalities. You know that far better than I, because you've traveled with them, eaten with them, sat in debriefings with them. So that becomes a whole new, almost art to the challenge of Formula One to get these people to perform.
But that's, I mean, when I was, for example, performance engineer working just on the technical side is interesting. But when I became race engineer, when you start to work with the driver and you realize the importance of that or that human factor of the driver, once like you work with start to work with different drivers, this is what I really enjoyed, and I could be race engineer for forever. At one point I said, okay, I would like to do something different, but I really like to see how can I understand this human, and how can I get him to perform at the top, with the resources that we have got. And as you say, in some of the characters are completely different, and then you need to adapt and try to be as close. I always try to understand the driver, be as close as possible to him, but I don't pretend to be, if you want to be the best mate or feel him, so he needs to feel confident, but you need to be honest and tell him the truth. When things are not good, you need to be honest, otherwise you will not perform. So that needs to be a mutual trust, that we can speak with transparency. But this is what I like with the different characters.
So a follow-on question, then I'm going to come back to you, Nash. But a follow-on question for you, Chevy, is when listeners to this podcast who follow Formula One, when they're listening to a Formula One race on a broadcast on TV, and you hear the driver and the performance engineer having a debate, maybe even having a minor dispute over something, strategy. You're trying to make a strategy call, drivers complaining about the pit stop or the strategy or changing strategy. Of course, the fans and the media pick up on that and they say, oh, the driver's arguing with the engineer. But this is all about the depth of the relationship that you need to have. You have to have that opportunity to have an honest conversation, even when millions of people are listening to you on the radio.
It's not like the arguing, for sure, because there is so much trust and confidence between them that they will see the things very straight, and it will seem sometimes that they're arguing, but actually, yeah, at that point they disagree, but then they will reach an agreement, and after the race, I'm sure that it's all clear. It's not like they are upset with each other or anything like that. It's just on the way how it comes across, because the spectators, they don't really know what's behind all that, probably.
So, Nash, turning to you then, let's go back to pole position operating system and talk about group flow and what this means, for a team. Because again, it's interesting for me as someone, when I worked in a Formula One team, we do a lot of things almost automatically, and so we assume that this is how all organizations work. But of course, the truth is that getting alignment and collaboration and optimizing performance as a team is not easy. And most organizations, certainly in my experience, most medium and large organizations find it really quite difficult to unlock this. So talk to us about how group flow and that the approach that you and Chevy are taking can really help organizations.
So I just want to differentiate what group flow is to collaboration. Group flow is not collaboration. It's coherence. It's a lot deeper than just collaboration. You can collaborate, but when you're coherent as a team, the bet of it is psychological safety. There's psychological safety, there's familiarity and trust, and most importantly, unconditional positive regard. It's it's the most important thing that the leader of that team should cultivate in the culture. And then group flow can happen, and then coherence can happen. So basically, in pole position OS, what we did with Trevi while we were working together, it was more like I was interviewing him a lot because I wanted to understand what is your experience, and based on that, I would translate it to what it would look like psychologically, map it out, and then we created a playbook. Right now, how can we make this become a system where other companies it can be integrated into their culture, can be embedded into their culture so that it becomes the default, so that group flow can become default. It's not happenstance.
So this is really interesting because so first of all, I love that explanation. It's not only collaboration; it's coherence, and you very quickly moved into talking about psychological safety, and it's very interesting how that has become such an important, if you like, realization by certainly by some leaders in Formula One and some leaders in business, how important psychological safety is. When I started working in Formula One, which is a long time ago, I would say there was less. I don't think psychological safety was even talked about. It was a command and control style of leadership. You have to do this, you have to do that, and if you don't deliver, you're kind of in trouble, which kind of diminishes performance. But psychological safety is all about enabling people, isn't it? To enabling people to contribute within an ecosystem.
And a lot of it is also kind of like there's no point in hiring the best of the best in the world if you as a boss don't trust them, that they know that they know that they know. Then what's the point, right? The purpose of building a team is you want them to complement each other with their strengths and their weaknesses, so that when they complement each other, everyone is strong, that the tie is really tight, and then everyone can move as one going towards point B. If obviously they're not coherent, you're pulling each other from different, or like everyone is getting pulled from different directions, then you obviously are not a high performance team, because there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of teams being siloed.
Yeah, actually, I have a question for Chevy, which I've kind of pre-written, talking about this topic of friction. We know that teamwork and execution can be hampered by internal friction and tension. And without naming any particular teams, I mean, I could think of a couple of examples myself, but without thinking of any particular or talking about any particular teams, how important do you find it to create a culture in which people really do have a shared purpose, a shared goal that they agree on a strategy, even if they have an argument at the beginning over how they're going to develop that strategy, but ultimately they move as one. How important do you find that that cultural element is critical to achieving success in Formula One?
For me, it's priority number one, and is what Nash was saying, and that's, you have got this now. The teams are very very large, and it needs to be from the very very top to the bottom in the entire organization, that it needs to be a shared goal, and that goal can be discussed, as you say, and can be some disagreement at the beginning or how we can put it together. But once there is a defined goal, that needs to be shared all across the company, and it needs to be, the organization needs to be well structured, and the roles within each department, and then the responsibilities, everything needs to be very clear in the terms of accountabilities, and just who is accountable for what. And then we say you need to empower the leaders, but we need to empower the leaders and give them support as well. Okay, because if you don't give them support, then it will be fear, and then is what we're saying just now. If there is fear, there will be a bit on the defensive mode. Nobody will take risk, and in such a competitive environment, if you don't take risk, you will not perform at the top. And that's what makes you can see that the teams now, they all tend to go this direction. But to put all that in place, you need time. It doesn't happen overnight, and I think that's where most times it becomes a difficulty. If teams they're not given the right amount of time to achieve all that process, then they will fail, because it's all about, now we hear about some teams that they need consistency. You can see that the more successful teams, they have been running in a consistent, there's been stability within the team, and that will bring trust, and then people will take more risk, they will feel more confident, more power, and that's how you perform. So I think, as you said, we don't say any names, but when that hasn't happened is because of all these reasons. For one reason or another, something was falling apart.
You've mentioned something that I think is not discussed enough in Formula One, but also in the world of business. So, whenever we're dealing with corporate clients, very often we find that their teams are under massive pressure to deliver financial results every quarter, every half year, every year. Everything is 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. And you and I both know, Chevy, that if you look at Red Bull Racing, they were born out of Jaguar Racing, and they took 5 years to get to the top. It took half a decade for them to get to the top of Formula One. Or you look at a team like McLaren, which arguably went through probably a 10-year drop in their performance and expectations. And as you know, McLaren reached a very, very low point in the middle of the last decade, where they were at the back basically. So time becomes a really important uh, discussion point. Of course, everyone wants results tomorrow, but the reality is that it takes time, not just for technical reasons, but for team building reasons. And certainly, one of my things that I've taken away from Formula One is the great leaders give the time. I think of Dietrich Mateschitz at Red Bull. He could have come in and said, if we don't win a race in the first 2 years, I'm going to quit. Instead of that, he gave the money until they were successful. So, can you talk to me a little bit more about that, about the expectation that people need to have about how easy it is to become competitive? It's fundamentally difficult, and one of the things you need most is the time to do that.
Exactly. I think the problem is that when you have got the championship with so many races together, the thing that you are more strict is with time, because nearly every week you have got a race weekend, and people want to have results today, and if it's not today, tomorrow. And you say it takes time to put resources in place. If you need to make some changes to move personnel, even if it's internally or externally, all that will take a lot of time. And then you need to have also a good visibility overview from the top all across the company. So you need the people from the very top as well to have a good understanding of the dynamics, what's happening inside the company. And when the teams are so large, sometimes it's not so obvious to see what's going on all across the company, or it will take time to understand. It's not like someone arrives and you have a clear picture of what's happening within all these 1,000 or more employees. It will take a lot of time and effort to understand that, and if you want to apply any changes. So unfortunately, you need to be patient. You need to have a clear view and where you want to go in short, mid, long term. But then you need to have the resources, the funding, and then the time.
I mean, having short, medium, long term goals absolutely critical, because you've got to take the team on a journey towards where you want to get to. Nash, you already mentioned earlier in our conversation that you did your research online about Formula One, but if I can ask you, what do you think it is specifically about Formula One that creates such a strong opportunity for businesses to learn? Obviously, there are lots of sports in the world and lots of high risk activities in the world. You mentioned rock climbing earlier on. What is it about Formula One that you think creates a particular fascination in terms of opportunity to learn?
I think number one is that they evolve fast. They need results today, actually yesterday, and they evolve fast. businesses, there's a lot of bureaucracy. They like to wait around. They like to wait for things to happen instead of actually having proactive approach of what can we. So we talk about friction earlier. I would think about it as how can you eliminate friction? Design a system, design a culture in a way that makes peak performance inevitable. You can learn a lot about that from Formula One. A lot of it is probably not perfect, but still, they operate at really high level consistently. The mindset of the people, they bring in people who are in the right seats, who are in the right roles, who are also champions in themselves in their own roles. And again, there's this synchronicity that you won't typically see in typical business organizations. And they don't think about that. They just think about money. They just think about the boring things, sure. Like, but there's no, I'd say there's no depth. But in Formula One teams, it's very visible. The thing is, how do you translate what you see on TV or what you see in Formula One? How do you translate that, right? And bring that into your culture so that it's something that you can also apply. That's where we come in.
And can you talk a little bit about the? I don't expect you to give any trade secrets away, but if you can talk a little bit about the program. So you take an organization that brings you into work with them. What do you what just talk to us about the program? What do you try to do? How do you work with client organizations?
So initially, what we would do is we would friction audit. So we see where the friction is, right? Just like when you go to a doctor, they would do a checkup. Where are the problems? Where are the things where the holes are? And then discuss that with the leader. Like this is where your problem is that you didn't know existed. Now we can come in and we have a solution to this problem. So that's just in a simplified way. That's what we do, where we do a friction audit for 3 weeks, really analyze, audit, interview the leaders, interview the people, so that we have a really good understanding of where they are, but also an understanding of where they want to go. And then the gap is where pole position OS comes in, right? We have the system in place. We can tailor it to whatever their industry is so that it would make sense, so that they would feel like, right, it is a system, but then it can still be tailored depending on their culture, depending on the industry.
So really, really interesting. I must say this resonates with me because whenever we do corporate events, and for example, when I do a briefing call with a client, quite often you'll have a chief executive or a senior leader almost download to you what their problems are. They'll say, we're trying to achieve this, but we're having a problem with this. We missed our targets last year, or sometimes it can be an organization saying, actually, we achieved our targets, but we're now worried that we can't sustain it. We don't know how to do that. And it kind of comes back to something, Chevy, that you talked about, which is the honesty of a relationship. So if you have a driver who's not being honest with you about their own performance, or a driver who doesn't think you're being honest with them about the engineering side, I mean, there's a fundamental problem there. And I always like to think that this is one of the reasons why our data-driven environment really helps us, because you can nowadays you don't have to have a subjective discussion about it. You can look at the data and you can actually see how the heck everyone's performing. So part of the Formula One mentality in terms of unlocking performance is all about the data, looking at what the information is actually telling you, and then trying to translate that into an actionable insight that you can do something with to improve performance. So, Chevy, from your point of view, how critical is that cycle of looking at the information and creating action from the data that's going to improve performance?
It is very important, but then because you have got multiple areas in terms of performance, if it's car performance, or it can be different parts of the factory. It can be car performance, it can be on the manufacturing, logistics. But if we focus on one area, for example, on the car performance, even within car performance, you'll have different departments, and every section will have different sets of data. It's very important when we have got discussions, when we have meetings, when we discuss plans to work in objective data. No? We don't want to have a subjective view. We don't want to have opinions. We want to base on data, but it is complex sometimes because every set of data will be linked to other set of data, and you need to be able to extract everything just to make sure that you're looking from the right perspective. Otherwise, so you need everyone to work together. If you get maybe only one department or one site to look at their site from only their perspective, maybe the answer will be different than if you look from different sides and what can be the different implications. And that's, I think, is the why it's so important to work as a team and to have all these sections, different departments to be so well connected, because otherwise you may think that you are taking an objective approach, but it may not be realistic. It can be other implications, and I think that's why Formula One is so complex, and any other business it can be also so complex, because you need to be able to, now you can see that all the teams, they're going very specific, the departments, they are very specialized in different areas, just to make sure that they can get the right data points to build the global objective picture.
So, Nash, coming back to you, I have a question about something you said earlier. So, when you go in and you talk to a client about what their objectives are, where the issues lie in their business, why do you think it is that so many business leaders or businesses, on the one hand, they have an ambition, they want to be better, they want to improve, but on the other hand, it's just not happening. And you talked about earlier on the fact that so much of business is bureaucratic and slow moving and actually risk averse. They almost don't want to change because so that's a really difficult gap to bridge. Why do you think it is that business leaders are so resistant to potentially making the changes that need to be made and to actually having the honest conversations about what needs to happen?
I like that question. And honestly, it's very simple. You see, when it doesn't hurt enough, you won't change. You only will change when it hurts so much. It's
Yeah,
unbearable. If it's
yeah,
just, yeah, it hurts, but I can like, okay, it's okay. Like I can like deliver like mediocrity. Like I'm quite, they're quite complacent. But when it hurts so much, I'm like, man, there's no way I'm hitting rock bottom.
yeah,
This company is hitting rock bottom. Bam, then they're open to changes. Then they're
yeah,
open to
yeah,
suggestions. Right? It's as
yeah,
simple as that.
yeah. You see, that's brilliant because I don't know what you think, but we look back on the global pandemic and so many companies that I deal with, and actually even Formula One itself, ultimately benefited from the global pandemic because it forced everyone to rethink how they do business. I mean, Chevy, if you think about Formula One, the Bernie Ecclestone used to take the TV village around the world. And then because of the pandemic, they built a remote TV technical center in near London. So all the races are now broadcast from one facility. So to your point, Nash, why is it that we wait for a crisis to force us to, to wake up and innovate and change?
Because it's human nature. I mean, comfort, right? Like it's not comfortable to change. If it's okay, like I'm gonna stay here. Why? Because we always go through path of least resistance. Because changing, again, is human nature. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I'm like, at least I have some certainty here, even if it's not the best. But I still have a lot of, I still have some certainty. But again, when it hurts so bad that you know what, I've got nothing to lose because I'm losing anyway. Might as well. That is a typical psychology of humans, but of companies.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and this is why it's such a fascinating area. And I think all of us who work in a sport like Formula One, when you step outside of Formula One and you look at other activities in your life, you think, why are those businesses not run better? Why are they not more efficient? Why are they not more focused on delivery and execution, because we take that automatically for granted within the sport. I have a couple of questions I want to ask you, Xevi, about your specific experience working in Formula One. I mentioned some of the drivers that you've worked with in the past. I mean, you've worked with Max Verstappen, you've worked with Kimi Räikkönen, you've worked, as I said earlier, with people like Eddie Irvine and Juan Pablo Montoya. What do you think differentiates the good from the great? I mean, I think all drivers in Formula One are competent. You know, they're capable of driving a Formula One car, otherwise they wouldn't be there. So, where are the differentiators between the good and the great, in your opinion, or in your experience? Not your opinion. I mean, your clear experience.
I think in especially when you go to a team in Formula One, now that the teams, or now even before when the teams are big, but now even much bigger, you have what you say, all the drivers out there are talented. But when you take, we're saying before about this high performance, or you have got the driver with the car, how you can get the best performance of that. Okay, you can have a talented driver, but the problem is that if you want to have the overall high performance team, you need the entire organization, and the driver is one of the biggest leaders of the team, together with the top management of the team. So if the driver, even if he has got the great talent, if he hasn't got the ability to bring the team behind him, I think it will be difficult to. You can have like some sparks, you can win some races, but to win multiple championships, you need someone that is bringing the team with him, and that for me will be the difference of from a good to a great. No.
So, Nash, this is a perfect opportunity for me to come back to you and say, in terms of creating flow, in terms of actually creating high performance outcomes, how important is it for leaders to be able to inspire teams? You know, how important is it for leaders to have that inspirational capability to bring a whole team with them?
I want to go back to what Chevy said about drivers because we had a little bit of a conversation earlier about this while I was analyzing what he said about, like the driver has a really good has to have a good relationship, not just with the race engineer, but he also has to have an understanding of how the rest of the team works because at the end of the day, it's not a solo sport. It's a team sport, except he's the one actually carrying all that load. He's the one that a lot of people see, and so he has to not just be a good driver, has to be a leader as well. He has to be able to like meet all the rest of the team so that they can see, right, this is the person, just say, I don't know, someone who's worked at the back, my performance will affect his performance. But if there is like a huge disconnect, right, then they wouldn't feel this emotional connection that, no, I'm just like a cog in a machine, right? So anyway, you were saying about like how important it is for leaders to lead, to actually lead, and not just um, from a physician standpoint. Number one, here's the thing: in order for you to be able to cultivate and engineer group flow, which will then sustain peak performance over a long period of time, you need to be able to establish direction, which is shared goals. Like if I'm the leader, it's not my goal that you serve my goal. No, this is our goal. And then you want to peak perform at your role and how you play in this shared goal. So the leader has to set the direction because then you know where you're going. You're not just this, there's a lot of confusion. There's no clarity. Number one, the leader has to provide clarity. How? By setting the direction where they want to go. Once you have a shared goal, then blending of egos come in. There's no just one person. You're not just uh, um, serving one person. You're serving the goal of the entire team. So every single person in that team is emotionally invested. They know that this is my role, and and if I play it really well, everyone else will win.
Thank you, Nash. I love your enthusiasm for this topic, and when you're talking about getting people from different backgrounds and cultures, and getting them to share in that goal, having a common purpose, and being really aligned. And yeah, I mean, it means having difficult conversations. One of the things that I often say to companies is, I think in Formula One, it's an advantage that everything we do is being watched by 100 million people on television. And I always say to people, if your company was on television for 2 hours in front of 100 million people, all of its operations, would do things differently because it's in the public domain. Our results are very public. So I just have a final question that I want to put to Xevi, and this is for the benefit of me as a fan and for listeners who are fans of Formula One. Xevi, you're Spanish, and I can only imagine that winning the Spanish Grand Prix with Pastor Maldonado was a big experience in your life and your career. I mean, I can remember my first ever experience of winning a Formula One race was at Jordan, and I just wanted to ask you about that moment because for the Williams team, it turned out to be their last ever Grand Prix victory. But I'm sure for you personally, both professionally and personally, was a pretty extraordinary experience winning that race.
Yeah, it was impressive experience, as you say, and because at the time we were not a top team in 2012. I mean, Pastor was having some spark, some good performance. The team was improving, and it was getting better and better. But again, we were not in terms of resources. We were not a top team yet. I think we were improving, and we needed time. But unfortunately, then there were some other changes in 2013. Even in 2012, Toto was with us, was with Williams, and then in 2013, all changed. So for circumstances, then we didn't have the time, and we could not consolidate the results. I don't think we were like in terms of a high performance team. I can remember, for example, the race in Barcelona. I could say it was a race that where trackside we operated, that was flow. I mean, everything was going. We had a plan, we with a strategy, with the tires, and Pastor executed everything at the perfection. That we could be faster than the Ferrari. So not only the trackside at the factory, and you could see some sparks of flow performance, high performance, but we didn't have the time to put everything together for the entire organization, and that's why in terms of championship results it was not consistent.
Yeah, I'm sure that champagne tasted good. Xevi and Nash, it's been a pleasure having both of you on the podcast today. Thank you very much for giving us your time. And Nash, how do listeners contact you guys if they want to reach out to you directly?
Look us up on Instagram, flow.insider, or you can check out our website, flowinsider.org/pole position OS. That's a lot, but you can just go to flowinsider.org.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today, and good luck with everything you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think that Xevi Pujolar and Nash Mayuela make a really interesting combination because you're talking about the practical leadership and frontline skills of Xevi Pujolar, experienced from over 25 years of being at the front line of Formula One, then combining that with Nash's insights into peak performance and this whole topic around flow, which I think is so interesting because so often what we do in high performance Formula One teams is kind of taken for granted, and it takes someone outside the sport like Nash to come along and really look at it and help to encapsulate what it is we're doing, and to be able to then apply that to other people and to businesses and teams beyond the sport of Formula One. If you want to reach out to them, Xevi Pujolar and Nash Mayuela are, of course, both on LinkedIn. I know that because I follow them. Nash Mayuela also has her own website, which is nashmayuela.com. That's NASHMAYUELA.com. And if you want to ask them any questions, you can drop me a line through the Performance Insights website. That's performanceinsights.co.uk. We have a contact form on there. Very happy if you want to drop me a line and ask me a question, or indeed whether about Xevi and Nash, or indeed about any of the guests on our previous episodes in recent weeks. The Business of Winning podcast, of course, brought to you by Performance Insights You can find us on that website, the .co.uk address. You can also reach out to us on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me, Mark Gallagher, on LinkedIn. And then finally, of course, we are also on Instagram. So you can find Performance Insights on there. Also, I'm on Instagram, and always very happy to hear from listeners to the Business of Winning podcast. I'll be joining you again in a week's time to dissect what on earth has happened in the final round of this year's Formula One World Championship in Abu Dhabi, that three-way battle that's going to take place over the weekend. And we'll also have a new guest for you next week, and watch out for the publication of that. We'll be hopefully going live with that in the early part of next week. So thank you in the meantime for listening. Hope you have a great week, and hope you enjoy a great weekend and the outcome that perhaps you're most looking forward to, whatever that may be, in Abu Dhabi on Sunday.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to the Business of Winning podcast. And if you want to learn more about Performance Insights, simply visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide.